Most planted tanks fail in the first 6 months. Not because the plants are hard to grow, not because the fish are fragile. They fail because of 10 quiet mistakes that almost nobody warns you about. And at least 3 of them are probably happening in your tank right now, even if everything looks okay on the surface. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what those mistakes are, why they happen, and how to correct every single one before they spiral into something you cannot easily fix. And I am saving the most counterintuitive tip for last. It goes against the advice you will find on most aquarium forums. But it is the single mindset shift that finally stabilized every struggling tank I have ever had the pleasure of working on. You are going to want to hear it. Let's get into it. The first mistake is the one that breaks more planted tanks than anything else. It is invisible until the damage is already done. It quietly sets the entire tank up for failure before a single fish goes in. And it all comes down to light. Specifically, the wrong kind of light. Plants photosynthesize using the full spectrum of visible wavelengths. All the colors of the rainbow, blended together, are what creates that crisp white light you see pouring out of the sun at noon. When you give a plant something narrow and lopsided, say a blue-shifted LED strip that was designed to make your fish's colors pop rather than to support photosynthesis, the plants simply cannot use it efficiently. They go hungry in a room full of light. They weaken. They become susceptible to disease and algae. And you stand there scratching your head, wondering what went wrong, when you can clearly see the light is on. The simplest way to find the right light without getting buried in physics is to look at the Kelvin rating. Kelvin measures the color temperature of a light source. You want something between 6,500 and 7,500 Kelvin. That range puts you squarely in the territory that mimics natural daylight. A full-spectrum bulb or LED fixture in that range produces light across all the wavelengths plants need for healthy photosynthesis. Here is the part that will surprise most beginners. You do not need an expensive light to get real results. There are fixtures available for around $15 that will grow easy plants beautifully. I have personally seen a $20 Amazon fixture outperform a $100 specialty light simply because the cheap one happened to land in the right Kelvin range. The expensive light was tuned for coral or fish color enhancement, not for plant growth. The price tag tells you nothing. The Kelvin number tells you everything. If you get nothing else right in the beginning, get this one thing right first. Because if the light is wrong, nothing else will save the tank. But here is the trap that catches people even after they buy the right light. And this brings us to mistake number 2. It is not about the type of light. It is about how much of it you use. And this is where I see well-intentioned hobbyists accidentally create an algae nightmare out of what should be a beautiful planted tank. The instinct makes complete sense. More light equals more growth. So you crank the fixture to full intensity and run it for 12, 13, 14 hours a day, thinking you are giving your plants every possible advantage. What actually happens is that within 2 or 3 weeks, your tank turns entirely green, not from plant growth, but from algae. Here is the biology behind it. Plants can only process so much light at once. That upper limit is determined by how much CO2 and fertilizer is simultaneously available to them. Light drives photosynthesis, but photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide and nutrients as raw material. When you flood the tank with more light than the plants can process, because the CO2 or nutrients are the actual bottleneck, the excess energy just sits in the water column. Algae, which is a far simpler organism with a far lower nutritional ceiling, happily absorbs every last bit of that unused light energy. Your plants get outcompeted in their own tank. Start your photoperiod at 8 hours a day. That is the safe floor. Once your tank has been running for 2 or 3 months, plants are established, and you are not seeing any algae pressure, you can cautiously push toward 9 or 10 hours. But the moment you see algae responding, the first thing to do before anything else is shorten the light period by an hour. Not add more plants, not dose more fertilizer, not scrub the glass every day. Shorten the photoperiod. Some plants actually prefer lower light intensity. Java fern and Anubias are the classic examples. Both evolved in shaded streams and riverbanks where direct sunlight barely reaches. Blast them with a high-intensity light in a tank with insufficient CO2 and fertilizer, and you will not get faster growth. You will get burned, bleached leaves, and a plant that slowly falls apart. Calm, consistent, modest light beats aggressive blasting every single time. Now here is something I want you to keep in mind for later. I am going to tell you about a tip near the end of this video that ties lighting, algae, nutrients, and the whole concept of tank stability together in a way most people never think about. Hold on to that. It is worth staying for. But right now, let's go underneath the plants. Because mistake number 3 lives in a place most people never look, right below the roots. Substrate, the ground your plants grow in. Think about what makes a garden thrive outside. It is not the seeds, it is not the sun, it is the soil. Rich, living, nutrient-dense soil is what separates a lush vegetable garden from a patch of gravel with sad little plants poking out of it. Aquatic plants operate on exactly the same principle. Standard aquarium gravel is essentially inert. Plants can anchor their roots into it, but they cannot draw nutrition from it. The roots extend, find nothing useful, and the plant relies entirely on whatever it can absorb through its leaves from the water column. Some plants do fine with that. Most do not. Sand is even more restrictive. The fine particles pack tightly and limit the root zone's ability to exchange gases and nutrients. The two substrates that consistently give plants the best start are aquasoil and what is sometimes called the dirted tank method. Aquasoil is made from volcanic minerals or clay that get compressed into small pellets and kiln-fired at high temperature. The firing process locks the pellet structure so they do not dissolve and cloud the water. They are naturally rich in trace minerals, and most brands also buffer the water toward a slightly acidic pH, somewhere around 6.5 to 7, which happens to be exactly the range where most aquatic plants absorb nutrients most efficiently. One bag of aquasoil in a well-planted tank can stay nutritionally active for a year or more before it starts to need supplementing. The dirted tank is the more rustic alternative. You take actual garden soil, plain topsoil, no fertilizer additives, no perlite. Layer it about an inch deep across the bottom of an empty tank, and cap it with a clean layer of sand or fine gravel to keep it from clouding the water. That cap is critical. Without it, the soil billows up every time a fish swims near the bottom. With a solid cap, the dirt stays put, and the root zone becomes extraordinarily rich. Plants grown over a dirt substrate have access to organic matter in a form that closely mirrors what they experience in the wild. The results can be remarkable. The reason I am spending this much time on substrate is that it is the one variable you cannot easily change later without tearing the whole tank apart. Every other mistake on this list can be corrected while the tank is running. Substrate cannot. Get it right at the start, and you give your plants a foundation they will benefit from for years. Now, once your tank is planted and you are watching it grow, there's a mistake that almost everyone makes at some point. It comes from caring too much, and it quietly undoes more good work than almost any setup error. Mistake number 4 is constant tinkering. You watch the tank every day. A leaf looks pale, so you move the plant toward the light. A stem seems leggy, so you replant it at an angle. You read a forum post saying that species does better in the back corner, so you shift it over. A week later, you read something else, and you shift it again. It feels productive. It feels like you are managing the tank. You are actually preventing it from growing at all. Here's what plants do when you first put them in a tank. The leaves they arrived with, grown in the nursery, often partially emerged above the waterline, are not suited to being fully submerged. They start to die back. The plant simultaneously directs energy toward growing entirely new leaves adapted to life underwater. This transition is called the melt phase, and it is completely normal. It takes anywhere from 1 week to 3 weeks, depending on the species and the conditions. If you move the plant during that window, you interrupt the transition. the plant has to start orienting itself all over again. Move it twice, and you have now set the clock back 3 to 6 weeks. Move it 5 times, and the plant may give up entirely. Not because it is diseased or your water is wrong, but because you never gave it the 21 consecutive days of stillness it needed to get established. Set a rule for yourself. Give yourself 2 weeks at setup to arrange things, rearrange them, change your mind, try different placements. After those 2 weeks, leave everything alone. Commit to the layout and let the plants grow. The difference between a newly planted tank and a 3-month-old established one is not primarily the water quality or the fertilizer. It is the roots. Deep, undisturbed roots anchor a plant, allow it to draw nutrition efficiently, and give it the stability to produce dense, healthy growth. You cannot rush that with movement. The same principle applies to your fish. Every net, every transfer, every relocation spikes cortisol, the stress hormone, and it takes several days for levels to normalize. Repeated stress wears the immune system down and opens the door to opportunistic infections. Pick a stocking list, commit to it, and let your fish settle into a home, rather than treating the tank like an ongoing experiment. We are halfway through now. The tip I told you about at the start, the one that changes how you think about the whole hobby, is coming up in just a few minutes. Keep going. But first, let's talk about water changes, because this mistake swings in both directions. Mistake number 5 is getting water changes completely backwards, either doing too many or not nearly enough. I see hobbyists who panic at the first sign of algae and immediately start doing daily water changes, scrubbing everything, dumping in dechlorinator every night, essentially stress cycling the tank over and over. I also see hobbyists who set up a planted tank, assume the plants will handle everything, and do not touch the water for 3 months. Neither approach works. The honest answer is that how often you need to change water depends entirely on the specific tank, its stocking density, plant mass, feeding rate, filtration, and how the nitrogen cycle is running. The only reliable way to know when a water change is actually needed is to test your nitrates. Nitrates are the end product of the nitrogen cycle. Ammonia from fish waste gets converted by bacteria to nitrite, then to nitrate, and nitrate accumulates over time. At levels above 30 to 40 parts per million, nitrates start stressing fish. At very high levels, they suppress plant growth. Test your nitrates once a week when a tank is newly established. If they are climbing toward 30 parts per million, do a water change of about 30%. If your plants are growing vigorously and pulling nutrients from the water, your nitrates may never rise above 5 or 10 parts per million. Some tanks genuinely run for 2 months or more without a water change and stay completely healthy because the plant mass and bacterial colony are managing the load themselves. A reasonable starting cadence for most moderately stocked planted tanks is 1 water change every 2 to 4 weeks, replacing about 25 to 30% of the volume. But let the test kit guide you rather than the calendar. There is also one thing that gets overlooked in every water change discussion. The numbers are not the only reason to do one. Sometimes the reason is purely visual. There is a cloud of detritus floating after you trimmed plants. There is sediment collecting along the front glass that dulls the whole look of the tank. A small water change and a light gravel vacuum takes care of it. And a clean-looking tank is a tank you will actually want to sit in front of. If you stop enjoying looking at it, you will stop caring about maintaining it, and everything goes downhill from there. A little cosmetic upkeep goes a long way toward keeping the hobby feeling rewarding. One more thing worth mentioning here. When you do your water changes, the temperature and chemistry of the replacement water matter more than most people realize. If your tap water is 10 degrees colder than the tank, that temperature shock can stress fish, especially small ones and sensitive species. Let the replacement water sit in a bucket for 20 minutes, or match the temperature with a thermometer before pouring it in. Dechlorinate every time, even if your tap water is supposed to be low in chlorine. Chlorine and chloramine kill beneficial bacteria in the filter and substrate, and losing that bacterial colony, even partially, can set back your nitrogen cycle for weeks. These are small details, but they are the difference between a water change that helps the tank and one that quietly hurts it. Now let's talk about something that sneaks up quietly, usually around the 1-year mark. Mistake number 6 is forgetting that your plants are hungry, not in a dramatic, sudden death way, in a slow, creeping decline that most people misread as a disease. Fresh aqua soil or a recently prepared dirt substrate is nutritionally rich. Plants in a new tank put on beautiful growth for months. Then the rate slows. Then a few leaves develop pale patches or small holes. Then the oldest leaves start to drop. Most people assume it is a water chemistry problem, or a CO2 problem, or a disease. What has actually happened is that the most accessible layer of nutrients in the substrate has been depleted. The fix is simple and inexpensive. Root tabs are small compressed nutrient pellets that you push directly into the substrate near the root zone of your heavy-feeding plants. They dissolve slowly and replenish the exact zone where the roots are actively feeding. Look for root tabs without a plastic or cellulose coating if you can find them. Coated tabs have a tendency to get sticky and drift back up to the surface before they have time to release their nutrients where you place them. An uncoated tab settles into the substrate and stays there. Liquid fertilizers address the other half of the nutrition equation. Fish waste is a decent source of macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the big building blocks. But fish waste is almost completely devoid of micronutrients: iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, and molybdenum. These trace elements are involved in the biochemical processes that keep plants healthy at the cellular level. Their deficiency shows up as yellowing leaves, purple undersides, poor root development, and stunted new growth. A quality all-in-one liquid fertilizer dosed weekly fills that gap reliably. If you are the kind of person who forgets to dose, and most of us are because life gets busy, an autodoser is a genuinely worthwhile investment. Around $50 to $60, 10 minutes to set up, and from that point on, a precise volume of fertilizer goes into your tank at the exact same time every day. The consistency alone makes a noticeable difference in plant health. Plants respond to reliable nutrition the way any living organism does. Give them what they need on a regular schedule, and they will reward you with growth that looks effortless. Now, here is where I want to talk about something the hobby tends to gloss over. Something that trips up even experienced aquascapers who know the chemistry well. And it is all about choosing the right plants. Mistake number 7 is buying plants your setup cannot support yet. The way aquatic plants get sold at most fish stores is almost perfectly designed to create this problem. Everything sits together in the same tank, under the same light, looking equally green and healthy. There is no label that says, "This plant requires pressurized CO2 injection and intense lighting and precise iron dosing." And without all three of those things, it will dissolve within 2 weeks. You reach in, pick the most beautiful thing in the tank, and bring it home. 3 weeks later, it is gone, and you assume you did something wrong, when actually, you just needed more information before you bought it. There's a spectrum of difficulty in aquatic plants that most retailers never explain. On the easy end, you have Java fern, Anubias, Amazon sword, hornwort, water sprite, various mosses, and hygrophila. These plants evolved in conditions that vary dramatically. They handle lower light, imperfect CO2 levels, irregular fertilizing, and inconsistent water chemistry. They are patient. They are forgiving. They are ideal for the first year of keeping planted tanks. On the difficult end, you have most carpeting plants, dwarf hairgrass, glossostigma, Monte Carlo, along with red stem plants and many demanding foreground species. These plants are extraordinarily beautiful under ideal conditions. They are also extraordinarily unforgiving when conditions are not ideal. They need precise, consistent light in the right intensity. They need CO2 levels that barely fluctuate. They need comprehensive fertilizing with close attention to trace elements. Beginners who buy these plants and then wonder why they die are not doing anything wrong as people. They were simply not given the information they needed to make a good choice. One of the best free resources I know for matching plants to setups is the website run by a European aquatic plant nursery called Tropica. They publish detailed cultivation guides for hundreds of species. Light requirements, CO2 dependency, nutrient demands, difficulty rating, growth rate, and ideal placement in the aquascape. Before you buy any plant you are not familiar with, spending 5 minutes on that site will tell you whether it is right for where you are right now. It will save you money and frustration, and the particular kind of discouragement that comes from watching a beautiful plant slowly fall apart. Mistake number 8 is skipping the trim, or more precisely, not trimming often enough, or not understanding what trimming actually does. A lot of people think trimming is a cosmetic task. You do it when the tank looks overgrown and messy. In reality, trimming is one of the most important tools you have for maintaining plant health and tank balance. Here is what happens without it. You plant 5 or 6 different species. One of them, almost always a fast-growing stem plant like water wisteria or rotala, takes off. It grows a centimeter or 2 a day. Within a month, it has reached the surface and starts growing across the top of the tank horizontally, creating a dense, floating mat that blocks light from everything underneath. The slower plants, your crypts, your foreground plants, your mosses, are suddenly in deep shade. They stop growing. They start melting. The fast plant keeps going, and within another few weeks, it has effectively won the entire tank. Trimming breaks this cycle. When you cut a stem plant back by 1/3 to 1/2, you immediately restore light to the lower levels of the tank. You also trigger the plant to produce lateral growth, side shoots that branch outward rather than just racing vertically toward the surface. A well-trimmed stem plant becomes dense and bushy. An untrimmed one becomes a long, bare stalk with a knot of growth at the top. Fast-growing stem plants generally benefit from a trim every 2 to 3 weeks once the tank is established. Slower plants, like Java fern or Anubias, might only need attention every few months. You do not need special tools. A sharp pair of curved scissors works for almost everything. The important thing is simply building the habit of looking at your fastest growers regularly and cutting them before they take over. There is also a technique worth knowing here. When you trim a stem plant, do not just throw the cuttings away. Most stem plants will root from a cutting within a week. Strip the bottom leaves off the cut section. Push the bare stem a couple of centimeters into the substrate, and it will anchor itself and continue growing as an entirely new plant. This is how you fill in a tank quickly and inexpensively. A single stem plant, bought for $3, can become 10 or 15 individual plants within a couple of months through regular trimming and replanting. The more densely planted your tank is, the better it handles algae, because dense plant growth leaves fewer nutrients in the water column for algae to exploit. Trimming and replanting is one of the most effective free tools you have for building a tank that stays clean and balanced. Now let's get into the topic that causes the most arguments in planted tank communities, because mistake number 9 is misunderstanding CO2. And the misunderstanding cuts in both directions. Carbon dioxide is one of the 3 essential ingredients for photosynthesis, alongside light and nutrients. Plants take in CO2, combine it with water and light energy, and produce the sugars they use to grow. More CO2 available to the plant, up to a point, means faster, denser, more vibrant growth. CO2 is always present in your tank to some degree. Fish exhale it constantly through their gills. Bacteria in the substrate produce it as a byproduct of decomposing organic matter. Some dissolves from the air at the water surface. So your plants are never operating at zero. They always have something to work with. But in many planted tanks, CO2 becomes the bottleneck. Light is good. Nutrients are adequate. But the dissolved CO2 in the water gets consumed early in the morning when photosynthesis ramps up, and by midday, the plants have run out. The rest of the light period is almost wasted. The plants have light and nutrients, but nothing to drive the chemical reaction that converts them into growth. Injecting CO2 with a pressurized system, or even a simple DIY yeast reactor changes the dynamic entirely. Plants bubble visibly in what is called purling, actually releasing oxygen as a byproduct of vigorous photosynthesis. Growth rates accelerate dramatically. Colors intensify, especially in red plants. The whole tank takes on a vibrancy that is hard to achieve any other way. That said, you do not need CO2 injection to keep a beautiful planted tank. A low-tech setup with the right plant selection, appropriate lighting, regular fertilizing, and a patient approach can produce genuinely stunning results. The natural planted tank method, also called the Wallstad method after the researcher who formalized it, uses a rich dirt substrate, modest lighting, and careful planting without any CO2 injection or complex filtration, and can sustain a thriving tank for years. The mistake is not choosing one approach over the other. The mistake is choosing an approach without understanding the trade-offs. If you have a high-output light on a tank with no CO2 injection and minimal fertilizing, your plants are going to struggle, and your algae is going to thrive. If you have CO2 injection and heavy fertilizing, but your light is too weak or the wrong spectrum, the CO2 just dissolves back out of the water before the plants can use it. The three variables, light, CO2, nutrients, work together. Overdeveloping one without the others creates an imbalance that always expresses itself as algae. A simple DIY CO2 setup costs almost nothing. Warm water, sugar, a teaspoon of yeast, a 2-liter bottle, an airline tube, and a small diffuser. It is not as consistent as a pressurized cylinder, but it will absolutely show you whether CO2 was your missing piece. If your plants respond dramatically, if you see those small, silvery bubbles forming on the leaves and rising to the surface, which is called purling, then you know CO2 was the bottleneck. At that point, you can decide whether to invest in a proper pressurized system with a regulator and a solenoid, or whether the DIY approach gives you enough of a lift that you are satisfied with it. One thing to watch carefully if you do inject CO2 is the effect on your pH and on the oxygen levels at night. CO2 dissolves into water and forms carbonic acid, which lowers pH. In a heavily planted tank running CO2 during the day, the pH can fluctuate by a full point or more between the morning and the evening. Most fish handle moderate fluctuation fine, but extreme swings stress them. Turn off CO2 injection an hour before your lights go out. At night, with photosynthesis stopped and fish still respiring, you want oxygen levels as high as possible, not more CO2 dissolving into the water. A timer on your CO2 solenoid handles this automatically, and it is one of those small details that separates a stable, high-tech tank from one that constantly confuses its keeper. All right, we are at the last mistake. This is the one I told you about at the beginning, the one that sounds wrong, the one most people resist, but the one that changes everything. Mistake number 10 is chasing perfection instead of building stability. Here is the pattern. A tank gets a little algae on the back glass. The keeper scrubs it off and does a water change. 3 days later, the algae is back. So, they scrub it again and add an algicide. The algicide stresses the plant slightly. Stressed plants release nutrients into the water column, and algae feeds on those nutrients. More algae shows up. Another treatment, another water change, another round of scrubbing. The keeper reads that their nitrates are a little high, so they change the fertilizer protocol. That disrupts the balance the plants had just started to find. Algae responds to the change, and the cycle continues for months, never resolving. The keeper increasingly frustrated, convinced there is something fundamentally wrong with their tank. There is nothing wrong with the tank. The problem is the intervention. Every time you change something in a planted tank, you are starting a new cycle of adjustment. The plants, bacteria, and algae all have to recalibrate. If you are making changes every few days, the tank never reaches equilibrium. It is permanently in a transitional state. And transitional states are where algae wins. The alternative requires a particular kind of patience that does not come naturally in the age of immediate feedback. When something goes wrong in your tank, resist the first impulse to react immediately. Look at it for a day or two. Ask what the root cause actually is. Is the light too intense or running too long? Is there a nutrient imbalance? Too much or too little of something specific? Is the tank overstocked for the plant density you have?
Is there a spot with poor flow where waste is accumulating? Fix the root cause.
Then, leave the tank alone for 2 weeks and watch what it does. A stable, well-planted tank is genuinely self-correcting in a way that constantly adjusted tanks never are. Dense, healthy plants outcompete algae for nutrients. An established bacterial colony handles the nitrogen cycle without you needing to intervene. A lightly and thoughtfully stocked community of fish produces waste at a rate the system can process. The biology does the work. You just need to set it up correctly and then trust it. The most beautiful planted tanks I have ever encountered belong to hobbyists who intervene the least. They set the tank up carefully. They address genuine problems when the numbers demand it. And then they leave it alone and watch it grow. That is the whole philosophy behind low-tech natural aquariums. Not that you are doing nothing, but that you are letting the living system do most of the work. Does a little algae on the back glass mean your tank has failed? No. Does one yellow leaf mean something is seriously wrong? Almost certainly not. Does a slightly elevated nitrate reading on a Tuesday mean you need an emergency intervention? Rarely. Set your standards around the things that actually matter. Fish are healthy, plants are growing, water is clear, and you enjoy sitting in front of it. And let go of the pursuit of a sterile, magazine-perfect tank that no one actually keeps in real life. I still scrub algae from my own tanks. I still catch myself adjusting something that probably did not need adjusting. But the single shift that made the biggest difference for me, more than any equipment upgrade, more than any water chemistry tweak, more than any new species I discovered, was thinking in terms of stability first and perfection never. So tell me, looking at your own tank right now, which of these 10 mistakes feels the most familiar? Is it the lighting, the substrate, the constant tinkering, the water change timing? Or is it that last one, the perfection trap? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely read every single one, and the thing you write might end up being the topic of a future video.